Historic St. Mary's City. My name is Donna Bird and this is Beth Sanford, and we are here at the Garrett Van Sweringen Inn. This site exhibit is placed on its original location, and it tells the story of Garrett Van Sweringen, a Dutch immigrant who was a prominent citizen here in the 17th century.
So Donna, our first recipe that we're going to do today is we're going to be making a soft cheese. Very simple farmer's cheese, if you may. And we can find recipes like this back in the 17th century and further back. Actually, we don't really know when cheese was first made. There's, in Greek mythology, there's talk of cheese or cheese making in there. Also in the Egyptian tombs, there are murals about cheese and cheese making. So a long time. But what we're going to do is we're going to just do a very simple, soft cheese. So I'm going to get our milk going. We're going to get our milk onto the fire. So we've got a pot on our cauldron on the fire.
I see you're using a special pot. You said that was a milk pan. So how were milk pans used in the 17th century?
So our milk pan, that's going to be where you are taking, once you have milked your cows, you're going to let your milk sit in the milk pan and cool so that you can then use it for making butter, or what we're doing today, making cheese. And so what we did was we put that milk into our cauldron. We're heating that up. And we're going to prepare a couple of things that we're going to put in here, because you can do different herbs. Add that to your cheese to add a bit of flavor to what you're making. So it's not the same thing every day. So today, Donna, I brought some fennel and I brought some rosemary. And what would you like? What do you think?
I think I'm going to go with the rosemary.
Rosemary.
We have established the rosemary here in Maryland, here at Historic St. Mary's City. And we have a primary source of rosemary. So I like that.
I like rosemary as well. So I'm just going to cut some of this up. I'm just going to chop it up. And a lot of people will put their rosemary or their herbs into their cheese once that cheese has come to a boil. And you start to then, when you get to the point to separating your curds from your whey, I like to put my herbs into the milk pan or into the cauldron while the milk is boiling, because I feel like if it boils with the milk, it will add a little bit more of that flavor, and we're looking for a nice flavor here.
So Beth, we're making a soft cheese, but what is the difference between a soft and hard cheese?
Donna, that's a great question. So a soft cheese is an unaged cheese. It's not a ripened cheese. Hard cheeses are aged or ripened, and they're usually used, rennet is usually used in the process of making those types of cheeses. Rennet is found in ruminant mammals. That means ruminant are mammals that have more than one stomach. So cows, sheep, goats, they are able to eat grass and roughage. They swallow it down while chewing it a little bit, and then it goes into their first stomach, or their rumen, where it gets broken down. And then you hear talk about cows chewing cud. The stuff that's been broken down is then cud that they regurgitate, which doesn't sound very pleasant to me. And that's what they chew. So if you see cows sitting in a field just chewing, they're digesting their food. They're chewing their cud. And so there is bacteria or enzymes in that rumen, in that stomach, that you can use for making your cheese, to separate the curds and to make that process get started.
So I know that from ship's records, we had soft cheese imported here to Maryland and hard cheese. But this farmer's cheese would be something that a colonial housewife would be making on her plantation frequently.
Indeed, she could, and it's very simple and quick to do, which is why we wanted to do it today and show everyone how to do it. Also, I think while we're getting started, we were talking about coals a moment ago. I'm going to go ahead, because we're going to be making some pickled beets later. I'm going to go ahead and start preparing these beets for that recipe. So I'm going to grab my rosemary that I'm going to put into the milk as it starts to boil, and then I'm also going to put these beets into, can I hand you one? Sure. Into the coals. I'm important for cooking because hardwood is going to, as it burns, it's going to be making those coals. So your softwoods, those are not going to be very good for doing cooking like we are doing today.
So let's talk about the textiles that women were wearing. I noticed that you got very close to the fire. Would there be something more useful to them working near the fire?
Yes, so you're going to be wanting to wear, and they were wearing natural fibers. So what I have on today is my petticoat and my bodice are both made from wool. So if I get that close to the fire and say one of the coals touches my petticoat, it's not going to catch fire. It might smoke a little bit, but it's not going to catch fire. We're going to be fine. You are wearing linen. I have my linen.
Also a natural fiber made from flax.
Indeed. And so again, these natural fibers are not going to catch a flame and burn you. You may get singed, but it's not going to catch fire. So let's check on this milk. Ooh, look at this. You guys want to come over closer? So our milk looks like it's boiling, so we're going to take that off the fire and we're going to add an acid to it to make our curds, so that we can have our curds in our way. You could use a couple of different things. You could use lemon juice, but with the columnists we're probably using is going to be apple cider vinegar, so that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to get a little close to the fire again, as you mentioned a moment ago. I'm going to take my apron. My apron is good for all sorts of things. And I'm going to put this right here on the floor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my apple cider vinegar. I'm going to come right over here and grab that. And we're going to put about a cup of that in here. I'm going to grab my spoon as well. So I'm just going to add about a cup of that. And it's going to immediately start to form those curds. So I've added that vinegar, and you can see we've got curds that are separating. So we're going to let this sit for about 10 minutes to let the vinegar do its work.
Now, Beth, you added vinegar to make the curds, but I've heard the word rennet. So where does rennet play into what we're making today, if at all?
So for the cheese that we're making today, we're not going to use rennet because that acid is going to do the same thing that a rennet would do. Rennet is used in mostly, from what I'm reading, cheeses that are going to be aged and they're going to be kept longer. You can use rennet in some soft cheeses. Today, mozzarella cheese. I've made mozzarella at home and I've used rennet for that. But for this colonial soft cheese, you were not using rennet in there. But rennet is as we were talking about earlier, the stomachs of those cattle, the sheep, goats, are found that there's a slime inside the stomach of those animals that you can use for helping curdle and make different types of cheeses.
And I can really get a nice smell, a nice aroma from the rosemary that you put
Smell
inside
rosemary
there.
there. And that's why I like to put it in while the milk is boiling, because I feel like it adds a little bit more of the flavor to it than if I do it right now. Because a lot of recipes will say you can add your rosemary or other herbs right now. The other thing that I didn't add that I should is salt. Salt is going to give a nice flavor to that as well. So you're going to use salt a lot of times for preserving foods as well. Use salt when you're salting your butter, and that's going to help your butter last longer. This is also not necessarily going to help your cheese last longer because this is probably not going to last very long. It's very good, but it's going to give it a nice flavor to it. It's going to add flavor to that.
Was there a special season for making cheese, or was it made throughout the year as long as you were milking your cows?
As long as you have a cow that you can milk, you can make cheese.
Now, once again, I'm getting the aroma from the rosemary. So I understand that herbs were essential for cooking, but I understand also there was another reason, another use for herbs.
For herbs.
Can you share that with us?
Yeah, so not only could you use herbs for flavoring food, adding different flavors to all of your different dishes that you're using, but you can also use them for medicinals. So, for example, let's talk about the beets. We're going to use those and we're going to make pickled beets in a little bit. Beets are very very good for a number of different things. One, you can eat them. You can eat them fresh. You can pickle them like we're going to pickle ours. But also, you could use beets for medicinal purposes as well. Nicholas Culpepper talks about using the juice from the roots of the beets, the actual beet part itself, you could put it up your nose to help with bad breath. Because apparently bad breath starts in the nose, according to Nicholas Culpepper. And don't forget these greens as well. We can add this. We don't need to throw this away. A lot of people today would just cut your beets off and toss this out in a compost bed or a trash can. You can add this to salads.
Yes.
And the greens are very nice.
I know that in the 17th century they would love to begin and end a meal with a salad, and it also aided in digestion. Speaking of Nicholas Culpepper, that brings me to talking about how we know what we know. So I know that our colonial sources are sparse here on how we know the food availability and what they were actually eating, aside from court record of Garrett Van Sweringen's cabbage being stolen, and sometimes inventories you will see food stuff. Our colonial sources are sparse. We only have a few records, but so what other ways do we try to better understand foodways in the 17th century?
That's a great question. So we were talking about herbs. We know a lot about herbs and their uses from different herbals that were around in the 17th century. Nicholas Culpepper, John Gerard, these are all 17th century authors who were writing herbals talking about the uses for each of those different types of plants. But there are also cookbooks in the 17th century, 16th, 15th. These are all cookbooks that they're using, or recipes that they're using in England. And so when they're coming here, they're using a lot of those recipes that they were used to at home. Except here, they're having to use different foods. So in England, they're mostly eating a lot of wheat. So wheat, corns, barley, things like that. Here, they're using corn. They're growing corn like the natives are growing it. And then they're using that corn to turn to flour. And then anything that they used wheat for back in England, they're using corn for here. But a lot of the things that they're growing in their gardens were things that they were already growing in their gardens or could find in England. So just like if we move to a new place, here we kind of bring the things that we're comfortable with and remind us of home. And the recipes that our parents used, a lot of times we use those same recipes.
And I was just thinking, another approach that I always like to use, aside from the English cookbooks, is through archaeological evidence. We know a lot about what we know through archaeology here, of what people were eating, and also through inventories, probate inventories. That's a list of possessions that one has at the time of their death. So sometimes they have food stuff listed, and that is very helpful. But most importantly, a fun way to find out about foodways, and we depend on it a lot today, is through Dutch paintings. If you look at your Dutch still lifes, you can see how food was prepared, some of the foods that were available, and most importantly, you can understand some of the techniques through just looking at paintings. So that's something fun to do, and that's something that you can examine on your own when you have some time.
Yeah.
So what's the next step, Beth?
So what I'm going to do now is we've had our beets in those coals for a little while, so I think we're ready to bring them out.
Flip them or just bring them out?
So we're just going to take those columns right there. You want to do it, or you have it?
I'll grab it for you.
All right, and we're just going to put them on our
Cutting board.
Oh,
they smell good.
Oh, they do. Now look, they've done very well for themselves in the fire.
Okay. You have no protection for your fingers, though.
I'm just going to get this little coal that's on the table off.
Oh my goodness, here we go. Perfect.
There we go. So you can see our beets are nice and warm and ready to be cut. So we're going to be pickling these. We're going to be doing a quick pickle, and that's why I wanted to roast them. If you're making pickles, you don't necessarily have to pre-cook or roast or boil your beets, because those are good. You can use them later and then cook them later once you pickled them. But we're going to do a quick pickle that we can eat immediately.
Oh, how cool is that?
So I think That's a great thing. And so that's why we roasted our beets. So they're still going to be, they're quite hot. I'll make sure I'm using the right side of the knife. And I'm going to just take this and I'm just going to peel off the peels of them. So I'm going to do that. And I think I'm going to take a moment to do this, and then we will, when I'm finished, we'll come right back to you. Now I have finished slicing these beets, and what we're going to do is, because they're still hot, I'm going to let them cool for a few minutes before I slice them, and we can come back to our cheese. So Donna, you want to come over here and see what it looks like?
Oh, I would love to. Once again, getting a little bit of that aroma from the rosemary.
We are ready now. You can see
absolutely
those curds. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start scooping them in to our colander right here. So we've got cheesecloth in here. Cheesecloth is pretty widely available today, but you wouldn't have to use cheesecloth. You could use linen. Any sort of loose fibered material will work. And what you're going to do is you're getting those curds into that cheesecloth, and that whey is, we're going to let that whey drain out. So I have my colander inside of another milk pan.
So this reminds me of like a cream cheese, something that, so cream cheese is
so cream cheese is a soft cheese. So what we're going to do is we are going to take this cheesecloth and we're going to squeeze out as much of this liquid as we can. You can see the cheesecloth is turning a little red because I've been slicing beets. You could dye your cheese using natural dyes. So you could, if you wanted a pink cheese, you do what I do, have beets. We have marigolds right here. You could use marigolds to dye your cheese. You could use a lot of different herbs for that dyeing. And I'm gonna let this sit and hang for just a few minutes. So that it kind of cools down, and then I'm going to squeeze more out. What you would normally do is you would have something that you could tie this to and let it hang and let that drip out. And then once it cools down a little bit, you could then squeeze more of that way out. Now, you talked about cream cheese. We could cream this if we wanted to and have a nice cream cheese. And what we would do is we wouldn't squeeze out all of the whey. We would leave some of that in, and you can then mix that. You could use a whisk. Today we would use probably a mixer, and you get a nice smooth cheese, like a cream cheese. We're gonna let this drip, and at the end you'll see the nice crumble. We'll be able to cut it, but it'll.
So Marylanders would have their own flavor of cheese. I know that by the 17th century there were hundreds of types of cheeses. So. And it all would depend on the resources and the geographic location. So here in Maryland, you have the cows grazing on the pastures here, so it's producing our own flavor cheese.
Indeed.
So that's quite interesting.
I'm going to sit this right here, and we can go back then to slicing these beets because they look like they're cooled down enough. So what we're going to just do is we're just going to do a nice thinly sliced beet, and once we get all of these sliced, we have our little ceramic saucepan near the fire. It's been sitting next to the fire because it is ceramic, so we want to make sure that we have been warming it up and preparing it to be hot. Ceramic, if you put a cold piece of ceramic right next to that hot fire, then it's going to break. So we started out the morning with it further away, and as I've been doing things, I've been moving it closer and closer, and now it's pretty close to the fire. So what I'm going to do while slicing our beets is I'm going to ask Donna to go ahead and pour vinegar into it. It's about halfway full.
Okay. So aside from beets, what else would you be pulling out of your garden to preserve?
Anything that you grow, you can pickle. Okay. So we have some cucumbers here. Now cucumbers would be more summer, late summer. So today you can get cucumbers almost throughout the year. In the 17th century, if you're going to eat cucumbers this time of year, you probably have already pickled them. If you have had a mild summer, so it's not too hot, your squash can continue to grow throughout the summer, so you might be able to have cucumbers this time of year, especially if your winter has not been too cold. So it really depends on the weather. The colonists were really dependent on Mother Nature and how she was treating them for their survival. So too much rain can be bad for your crops. It can be bad for your tobacco, which is what they're using here for their money. But it also can be bad for their corn. It could be bad for their garden crops. Too little rain, again, is going to be bad for them. So you need to be prepared and try to use what you have and to preserve as much as you can.
So the menu was very simple. It was what was available. So if you didn't preserve enough, well, then you would be in trouble once the winter set in. So as a colonial housewife, you would be out there always thinking what you were going to put aside for the season to come.
Well, while I finish doing these beets, Donna, what are you doing?
Well, today I'm going to be making a spiced wheat bread. I thought, how perfect. We're in Garrett Van Sweringen's private inn. He offered the finest accommodations here in town. So I thought we would make this wheat bread. It's a recipe from the Sensible Cook. It was first published in 1676 and was considered the only Dutch recipe book of the 17th century. Now, this recipe book really did reflect more of the dishes that the middle class and maybe more of the wealthier people would have eaten. But Garrett Van Sweringen ran a private inn. He offered the best accommodations, like I mentioned. So I often think that he would have been putting this dish together because it was prepared by the Dutch for special occasions. And so that's what I'm going to be making today. Back in the 1600s, most of your cookbooks were just re-editions of recipes put together to make a new cookbook. But this was considered a new cookbook for the 17th century and the only Dutch cookbook at that time period. So today I'm going to be making zoete koek. Zoete meaning sweet, koek meaning bread or cake. And this is a dense wheat bread. It would have been made during special occasions because, of course, you're going to be using your wheat and your spices, all the things, all the foodstuffs that would have been costly. So I thought it was very appropriate because we're inside of Garrett Van Sweringen's private inn. Of course, he was a Dutch immigrant, and I know for sure most people settling here in Maryland love to practice their customs and their traditions, but they just had to adapt to what was available. But in this case, it was by mid-17th century, end of the century, they were acquiring more things through importation. If you could afford to have it, you were going to bring it here. So the first thing I'm going to do is get this recipe going with some wheat flour. Okay. Back in the Netherlands, they didn't grow enough wheat for their citizens, so it was all imported. Most of it was coming from Poland. Here in Maryland, only the large plantations may have had wheat, or if you once again could afford it, you were having it imported. And that leads back to inventories, researching inventories. I have found that William Smith here on the grounds had 13 bushels of wheat. I know that other colonists as well had wheat in their inventories, but the staple crop was corn. So if I were someone here in the 17th century and I wanted to make something of my custom that I was used to, a recipe, I would just incorporate that corn. Yeah, Miss Beth. So I have the flour, and what I'm going to do now, it's a very simple recipe. It's a dense wheat bread. You add your 2 cups of flour, and then you are going to add a cup of dark brown sugar. Oh. Now, I know from ship's records, and I know from inventories, we actually had some citizens who had the brown sugar. So with the brown sugar, I will add that in. Now, I want to talk a little bit about measurements, and you know more about this than I do. Reading recipe books are are a little difficult to navigate through because they don't really talk about specific measurements.
No.
So I said a cup, so I'm just kind of tossing it in. How do you do your work when you're looking at your recipes?
Well, it's a lot of trial and error because a lot of recipes are made to taste or put in a pinch. Well, how much is a pinch of salt? What is a pinch of salt to you, Donna?
Just a pinch.
What is it? Well, a pinch of salt to me might be a bigger pinch. So a lot of it is you're doing these recipes to your own taste. So a cup of sugar, well, that we have a measurement of what a cup is today, but was a cup the same size? Were they talking about a measured cup, or were you talking about they take a cup?
Right.
And they just put it in there. Sometimes we don't know. So we do the best we can, and once we make it, then we go, oh, you know what? I think next time we make it, we're going to need to put more sugar in there.
So
or next time we make it, we're going to put less sugar in there.
So measurements were not standardized in the
No,
17th century, and I think I read that it wasn't until the Fanny Farmer cookbook in the 19th century things were standardized, so you could actually follow a recipe with precise
And especially
measurements.
for the Dutch and for the English, was a cup the same to the Dutch as it was to the English.
Very true, very true. Something to think about. So I have my flour and I have my sugar, and now I'm going to add in my spices. It's adding in all of your dry ingredients first. So the first spice that I'm going to be adding in is a little bit of cinnamon. Next, I'm going to add my cloves that I have used in my mortar and pestle. I'll take out what I have ground in there. Next, it's going to be the nutmeg. Now, this is interesting. The nutmeg actually, there are two spices in one. This is the nutmeg, but the outer shell is mace. So if you ever use mace, now you know that inside of that skin is your nutmeg. So you get two spices, two for the price of one. So now I have to mention that with the ship's arrival, if you could afford these goods, they were imported, and if you could afford them, that was great. But there is a darker side to importation, particularly with the sugar. During the 17th century, the cane plantations relied heavily on slave labor. So that's the darker side of what was going on with importation of spices and sugar. So it's always something to reflect on when you're using your goods during your hearth cooking. So I have some nutmeg. It smells really good. I can't help but love the smell. So here are my dry ingredients. The last ingredient in the modern recipe, which we'll be following today, is baking powder. Well, they didn't have baking powder in the 17th century. That didn't come around until 1840. So what were they using if you didn't have baking powder? So they were using yeast. Yeast was put into cakes and breads, and also pearl ash. Now I'm going to add my liquid, which would be milk. So once again, they were doing very little drinking of milk, but it was added to dishes, your custards, your cakes, all kinds of dishes that required milk.
So kind of another way of preserving or using your milk. So
that is so true.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give it a stir.
well, that was yummy.
It looks stiff at first. It kind of reminds me of, when you first mix up your brownies. You have to keep stirring.
Kind of has the
quickly
consistency
stirring
of
it.
like a fudge.
Yeah, it's
right
going to be
there.
very stiff. So I do have a little bit more milk in here, and I'll add that. And you just keep stirring it. So here we go. I am going to get ready to put this in a Dutch oven. I'm going to bring it over here to the table. Now, the Dutch oven was considered the most versatile pot in the kitchen because you could actually stew with it, you could fry with it, saute with it if you needed to, and of course now we're going to bake with it. And it was special because it had a lid that had a lip. As you can see the lip here, and that's going to keep the coals on top to keep everything baking. So what I'm going to do is add my batter to my pie pan and prepare it for my pot.
And I think while you're doing that, I also have these beets that I finished cutting while you were working on that, that I can add into my little saucepan over there. So we've got some of the vinegar in there that we already put in there, that Donna put in there for me earlier. So I'm just going to take some of my beets, and then I also have pickling spice. So today, we are very lucky in that you can go to the store most of the year or order online and order something called pickling spice. Whereas in the 17th century, you're using the different spices that you can gather and creating your own pickling spice. So your pickling spice from plantation to plantation might be different. Maybe you're growing fennel on your plantation, so you have fennel in yours. But maybe Donna's not growing fennel on her plantation, so she might not have fennel in her pickling spice. So you just use the things that you have. So there's mustard seed in there. There's some red peppers in here. There's pepper in here. All sorts of things that we have available today. But you would use the things that you have on your plantation. Exactly. So I'm gonna put these and some of the spice into my saucepan.
So my lid is on. This is known as a Dutch oven or a bake oven, and I'm going to carry it over to the firebox. Now, the one thing lovely about the bake oven is you're going to have the coals on the bottom and coals on the top, and that's going to help you control the temperature to get your goods baking. So I'm going to place this on some hot bake coals that Beth has prepared for me. Coming here to the New World, you were given a list of cookware things that you would need to have once you were established here in the colony, and you had pots, and you had your cooking utensils, and you had woodenware, and you had of your pots, maybe on your list you would have brought a bake oven. So one thing I do want to mention about this dish that we have preparing is that the Dutch really love their sweets. They were known for making sweet treats. In fact, some of the sweet treats we eat today, donuts, that was first brought to us by the Dutch. Pancakes, if you love pancakes, the Dutch were responsible for pancakes, and they're still popular today. Coleslaw. Coleslaw is actually Dutch. It was cold slaw, meaning cold salad.
Got it.
In Dutch, which translates to us today as cold slaw. So we know that they had a sweet tooth, and so today all of those foods we still incorporate in our fun food that we like to eat today.
So if you like them, thank the Dutch.
Thank the Dutch, absolutely. So that's going to bake for about 30 minutes in this Dutch oven. But once again, I'm going to kind of time it and kind of go, and I will lift the lid and I will just give it a little pat and see how it's cooking, and then we will be able to slice it and enjoy.
Donna, that was awesome.
Well, thank you, Beth. I think today that we've brought forth the best of the Dutch and the English, that's for sure. So I will put this aside, and it looks pretty good. So there's our zoete koek, our pickled beets, our homemade cheese seasoned with rosemary.
Oh, let's put a little bit of each in maybe this bowl.
Sounds delicious. How about if I just move this aside and we can do a little slice and put the cheese in the bowl?
Yes.
Would you like to do that?
And I'm gonna take, so I put some whey in this cheese. I put some of that whey that I drained off back into there, and add a little bit more salt, and then I sat here and I stirred it for a good bit. So I've got this creamed now. Not as smooth as a cream cheese that we would use today, but if I keep working at it, it probably will.
How about if I slice this a piece and then we'll add some cheese to
I
our
like it.
zoete koek?
And then I also have this round of cheese.
That is beautiful.
That I did not. It does look quite nice, doesn't it?
Nice little cheese ball.
So this one we will slice.
Oh, lovely. I love
So it's a little bit crumbly, but that's okay.
Looks like a feta.
And it does. So what if I put that right there? Oh wait, I can put it right here. Put it right here.
I'm putting it on the...
And then we'll have a little bit of this cream cheese right here. I like it. Then perhaps a beet or two. What do you think?
Pickled beets are the best.
I do love pickled beets. So,
Pickling any type of root vegetable is always good, especially this time of year.
how does that look to you?
Oh, it's simply gorgeous. One thing the English loved was a table that was aesthetically pleasing. I think we've achieved that.
I think we have.
So, how about if we try a little bit?
I think we should. That's my favorite part of cooking.
I will go ahead and serve myself a piece of cheese on the bread, and I'll let you do the same. Or you have your...
I'm going to use my knife that I've been using. So I'll just cut a little piece right here. And, oh, thank you very much.
You are so welcome.
I'm going to break this little piece off. Put this right here.
Well, very good. I hope you enjoyed today's Hearth cooking program. If you'd like to learn more about Hearth cooking, come join us here at Historic St. Mary City.